Damon Williams stole the show at Sunday's practice.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot, especially now that we're back in the swing of things from fall camp. Lars, you and I just got back from Sunday's practice, where there's a whole lot that we want to get to. So we'll save some miscellaneous thoughts and observations for the end of the show, because we need to talk about the depth and competition, both at wide receiver and defensive back. I know we talked about it last week, but there's so much more that we need to get to, including some standout young guys. But that was all secondary. See what I did there? Because Damon Williams there. Thank you. There were so many just really impressive throws, some runs, and just gave so much reason for optimism for the 2025 season.
It's game time, right? No pun intended for the sponsor here, but it's a great lead into it, because Damon was really playing like he's getting ready for a game next weekend. That's kind of what it seemed like, where no matter who he was throwing to, and I don't think it was intentional per se, but he had like a long, I want to say 25-yard pass to Decker to Graf against air, no defenders, all that on the East Field early on in practice. And it was just a sign.
Oh, that was his first throw of the day. Yeah.
And that was like, you know what? And Damon gave a little salute and a smile as he came across, rolled to the side, and then go back with the quarterback. So I was like, Damon's already locked in. And that was exactly what we saw throughout the rest of practice, where one went to Rayden Linesbright, one went to a couple. Dezmen Roebuck had some good catches. There were so many guys that were benefiting from it, and Damon was just putting it every which way it had to be.
So one thing I think you missed there is Decker dropped that pass. That one, yeah, that one did fall incomplete, but you're right. It was just kind of a really nice sign for the rest of the day. Obviously, until the first sandstorm drill, where he did struggle a little bit. He missed a couple of throws where just the timing seemed a little bit off, but for the rest of the day, we saw 1-on-1s, a couple of 9-on-9 drills, and then some 11s as well, where he just really stood out. I don't know about you, but I think the best throw of the day was Rayden Linesbright did a really nice job kind of beating Ephesians Prysock on a go route for, I think what I have down here as a 25-yard touchdown. And there were a couple of the throws throughout the day where I couldn't help but be really impressed, because I know people will, on the national circuit, they'll just kind of look at his athleticism and say, oh yeah, that's one thing that really stands out. But the accuracy is there as well, where I think some people might kind of look at his 78% completion percentage from last season and think, oh, he only started 2 games. He's only in certain situations. So maybe that will regress toward, the mean a little bit more in 2025, which I think is very, very, accurate, where that is certainly a very possible outcome here. But I look at him today, and there were so many different tight window throws. There was one at the very end of one of the 11s periods to Kevin Green Jr., where a couple people around me pointed that one out as well. Shout out to Coker. And there's just there are also those kinds of throws that he can make into tight windows and do that on a very consistent basis. So I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was a big part of this as well. It wasn't just, the home run here or, a nice play there. He's so good at getting through his progressions quickly, making the right reads. There were several dump offs to Jonah Coleman and some of the other running backs as well, where I just look at his skill set as a quarterback. And that's why he's a Jedd Fisch quarterback first and foremost. Having the athleticism, having all those extra gifts are fantastic, but he's a quick, efficient decision maker who is not going to put the ball in harm's way a whole lot.
Exactly. It's one of those where you mentioned the dump off. To be clear, not like when people look at the 78% completion, people are like, oh, maybe just easy passes, easy completions, right? The high percentage throws. What,
sure.
The NFL lingo is. But that's not what he is limited to. We saw it from all 3 levels, and in all 3, both sides of the field. You look at it and say, no matter whether it was in a slant, going to Dezmen Roebuck, going to Rayden down the field, and worth reminding again, these are not his number 1 guys. These are, Denzel is still going to be there. Omari Evans is still going to be involved. I think Omari was, also involved today as well. But just, we're talking about Damon connecting with anybody and everybody. I think that's a sign of a good quarterback, is no matter who you are, how much time you have with him, he's still going to find a way to connect with you. And if you're open, he's going to find you. And even like, the rating catch, I mean, he had some separation, but that was a very, very tight arced window that he had to fit that in over a very tall cornerback and a pitching price talk. And he just seemed to do it with ease. And it's just like, that's why we're so high on Dezmen. That's why we believe in the caliber of player that he is, because we see it day in and day out of practice. And yeah, again, you could say it's practice, especially day 4 at fall camp. What does it really mean? But it's an early sign of like, hey, there might be some special things to come this season.
So I'm glad you mentioned just the arcade fitted to with that one, because we saw him make a similarly nice throw to the corner of the end zone during a red zone drill a few plays earlier against or it was to Rashid Williams against Tacario Davis, and Tacario did a tremendous job recovering and just like laying out to get the PBU on that one. And like it was still one of those things that I look back on and said, that was a really nice throw, but it also helps you out in the end when you have 2 6'4" corners on the outside that you have to work against, because they can still make those kinds of plays. And it just makes things a little bit more difficult in practice when you have just that level of skill that you have to go against on the outside. But there are so many other things that I kind of looked at where there was one read option play where obviously they're not going to hit the quarterback during practice. But even then, Dezmen still outran all the other defenders for a 15, 16-yard gain before a couple of guys finally closed in on him. And there are so many different other things like that. That's why we wanted to lead with, the passing and what he's doing with his arm, because it's just something where I know Jedd Fisch talked about it a lot during Big Ten Media Day as well, but you just kind of look at his skill set as a whole. And it's not even because you can't say, oh yeah, he also is one of the best athletes on the team and is a good runner. No, that's something you have to account for on every single play. Like with Michael Penix, we knew that was a secondary thing where, obviously we know he's a really good athlete too, but you were never thinking, that's why it works so well in the Texas game. You were never thinking like, oh yeah, that guy's going to pull down and run because of his injury history and because of some other things. But with Dezmen, that's something that defenses have to account for on every single play. And there were so many times that showed up today, not just when they were, installing things like read options and just different running plays, but there were so many other plays where just the edge rusher would have to freeze, or a linebacker or the nickel corner, whoever it was, would have to freeze and keep their eyes on Dezmen, because that if you're even half second late, he can get around the edge and start picking up yards with his legs. And that's just one of the things that makes this offense so much fun to watch, and why I think it's ready for such a big step forward in the Big Ten this season, because those are factors that you just didn't see for the majority of last year.
For the reason that you had Will Rogers, and you were never really going to have Dezmen for all 13 games as a starter. But again, he earned that right with his play on the field. The other thing kind of to consider with all of this is defensive coordinators usually will tell you have to play fast and free. Don't think just read and react. That's the whole point of defense. Dezmen makes defenders think. That is his advantage. Where when you're talking about one trick ponies at quarterback, hey, you have a great arm, but if you're not able to either move in the pocket, just find open windows. And again, Dezmen is still always going to look to throw first, despite what, the easy comp would be, Kyler Murray, those Lamar Jackson, those things. It's like, but he's a honestly better passer than I think people are realizing. And they're kind of dismissing that 78%, saying, well, that's just, probably garbage time against Eastern Michigan or what, this smaller schools, preseason, or not preseason, but non-conference and things like that. No, he had actually legit performances against some of the better teams. He did pretty good against Penn State, did pretty good against Louisville, held his own in a number of games. Yeah, might not have had a great record at 0-2 in his starts, but showed enough that that's why that was so imperative for him to get those opportunities last season to now come into 2025 and say, you know what, I already knew I was going to be the guy this year, but now I'm actually prepared and ready because I've been in every single scenario as Jedd put me in last season.
It also helps when you have a plethora of talented receivers to throw to on the outside. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink minus the alcohol into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Let's be honest, some days on the course or off it, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. And that's one thing that I know I couldn't agree with more. Some days I want to just get after the driving range or try to get a quick 9 holes in after a long day of work. And sometimes I just need that extra boost of energy, and 5 Hour Energy is my go-to. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to to without chasing down the bev cart. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use our promo code LOCKDOWNGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. This code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion flavor 5-hour energy shots today. Lars, one thing that we hadn't got to see yet that we finally did get a chance to watch a little bit of, which was a lot of fun. I know there were a lot of fans in attendance today, which is always great to see too, was the one-on-ones. And we got an up-close view of watching some of the wide receivers and defensive backs. I was going to ask if there's anyone who stood out to you, but we need to start with Dezmen Roebuck. This is the guy who every single member of the coaching staff that you've got a chance to just ask about any freshmen that are standing out right now. I feel like Dezmen Roebuck is the first name out of their mouths.
Honestly, he is, because you think back to his high school production when he committed to Washington, it was kind of, oh, why are you taking this kind of underrated 3-star out of Arizona? We know Jedd knows the state of Arizona pretty well, but it just seemed like an interesting take. And then turn on the tape and see the production, and that's literally what he's showing up and done. Like he wasn't here in spring ball, so he's had to play catch up to Raiden, to Chris Lawson, who's still working through some things, and Marcus Harris and all that sort of stuff. But Dezmen's really just outshined everybody. I mean, Raiden's touchdown kind of, shout out to him for that. But you look at Dezmen, he, like with Kai Horton or DeMond, he was having success with just getting open. And he's just kind of that guy that just, you're going to love this, Julian Edelman, just kind of finds a way to get open. Just the guy that, again, undersized at 5'11", but finds a way to play above his height and get open. And that's all you can ask for, especially out of that position.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when Washington first took his commitment, it was kind of like, oh, is this going to be another slot guy? And then talking to Kevin Cummings with him about him the other day, he was like, no, he's been lining up outside for us a little bit. He can do some different things and move out around the formation a little bit. You said it perfectly. It plays bigger than his size. That's one of the things that I loved about his film is you would not, like, if you just went in and watched his film, you would not say, oh, that guy was listed at 5'10", 170 in high school. Like, no way, because of the way he goes up and high points the football and is able to just make contested catches in traffic. It's so much fun to watch. And we've seen that show up through the first couple of days. Like, we talked to DeMond Williams about him the other day and said, yeah, he's elite. Like, obviously I've had a relationship with him for a long time. We played youth flag football together back in the day. So it's always cool to see those relationships like come through at the college level as well. But you see why too, because DeMond made a couple of throws to him the other day during practice that I was really impressed by. And he made one of my favorite plays that I've seen so far in camp was he was sliding just towards the first down marker and had to reach behind him towards his back shoulder and just made it look effortless. Like it was really cool to see just the body control that he had. And that showed up a little bit in one-on-ones today. The other thing that this coaching staff loves is somebody who will be a willing and able run blocker. There was another play that I think we should point out where Rashawn Clark forced and recovered a fumble on, I think it was Audric Harris on a wide receiver screenplay. And Dezmen Roebuck is one of the players who was out in front blocking. And I don't remember who it was because I was like watching the ball. And all of a sudden I looked up and whoever the defensive back was like basically getting pushed into the wall on the far side, like right in front of the recruit seating.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was either because I noticed the Rashawn, return the scoop and what would have been probably a scoop and score, and Christian Capel in front of the pod and Rashid both like, we didn't see the play, but did you see the hit that Dezmen just had? And it was almost like he just I think Christian used Michael Orr example where it just took him out. Remember when he in the blind side, like I did take him to the bus because he had to go. It was literally like that, and you don't think of a guy that size being able to move guys. And for the life of me, I could not remember who the defensive back was, but you pick anybody in that DB room, like most of them are pretty tall. And even if they're not, like they're still pretty bulky guys. And not saying Dezmen's lightweight in any stretch, but I wouldn't necessarily take him against, Baker's dozen guys in that secondary, just when you look at the measurables. But that's, again, he plays above every listed measurable. He can actually hang and do it. And I think that's what's important.
So let's get through one more receiver before we flip sides, because there really were, and like there's a point I want to take 60 seconds for before we move on at the very end of this to just kind of get across, which is one of the reasons I'm personally really excited about this team. But one guy that I do think we need to talk about, and you were talking about him today while we were hanging out in the stands, is Rashid Williams, where he's just someone who continues to show up day in and day out. And we've seen some interesting pairings at every position over the first couple of days of practice, whether it be, wide receiver, defensive back, defensive line, offensive line, whatever it is, we've seen some, let's just call them different combinations than we might expect in the game thrown out there during practice just to see what works. And no matter what, Rashid is a guy we've seen running with the first team the whole time while Denzel Boston continues to recover from an injury. And it seems like he's going to start ramping up a little bit more next week. But Rashid is just somebody who continues to make plays day in and day out.
He really is following in Denzel's footsteps. If you think about what we talked about, I think recently, I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago, but Denzel would have played earlier had it not been for the 3, draft picks in front of him. And I think that is kind of the thing with Rashid, where he's had to wait, buy his time, did have the touchdown against Iowa. So, he's got a little bit of a highlight to him, but still really hasn't been able to fully display that because of the guys that have been ahead of him. And I think we've seen that both in spring and fall camp where he's been able to grow, excel. And I mean, again, you mentioned things to Jacario. I still thought Rashid had a decent shot at that until Jacario made a Spider-Man play.
He came in flying, man.
And so it's not for a lack of Rashid not being ball attentive or things like that. It was just, great player made an even greater play. Like, that's just all you're talking about. But that's what makes these guys better. And I think it's important that Rashid's getting this time now because, again, when people ask, oh, hey, are you concerned about Denzel? Or you ask me, like, hey, if it comes to August 17th, let's just say, and Denzel still hasn't practiced, like, no, that means Rashid's balling out and you don't really need Denzel. Now, again, it kind of goes two ways there because you do want to get Denzel in at some point, but there's no reason to rest him back because Rashid has been taking those steps.
So I really like where you're going with that. I just want to make sure we talk about some of these defensive backs as well, where one guy who really stood out to me throughout the day was Rylon Dillard-Allen. And he had a couple of PBUs on one of the Sandstorm, which for anybody who doesn't know when we're talking about that, it's the competitive, just kind of full team period drills that we're always talking about at the very end of practice, where the plays are scripted, the spot is scripted, but you still have to go out there and make a play. And Rylon kind of lined up all over the formation where he took some snaps with, the first team where McEllisteen didn't practice today, but he kind of stepped in behind Alex McLaughlin and CJ Christian as that safety 3, which is one of the reasons I think he might wind up finding his way onto the depth chart by the time the season rolls around. But he had a couple of PBUs on that final drive. And I'm so impressed with him where it feels like in the long run, he's probably going to wind up as the post safety. Feels like we won't see him start in that role till next season, especially with, some of the guys ahead of him. But every time you watch him, you just see why this coaching staff is so high on him and why, you and I talked about it throughout his entire recruiting process. Like, even while he was still committed to Arizona State, we knew that Washington was still trying to make a push because he was the top safety target on their board. And the more I watch him, I just think back to that, like, truly every single day, because it was very obvious why this coaching staff was so high on him.
Yeah, it's so fun to watch Rylon play. RDA, like, he's already, I don't know, we got to come up with a nickname already.
He's got one. It's Batman.
And again, I think that's perfect because I don't think he needs a position. He's a ball hawk. Like, he just goes and finds the ball, makes an impact. And that's, I don't know what your angle was on the PBU that he had on that drive, but I think he could have also had a pick and could have picked it if
he was close. Yeah.
And so again, I'm not, cherry picking here, but I'm just saying, like, that's already at the level that he's at. And I noticed early on, I think, let's say 20 minutes before that, they were going through a couple of drills, and Taylor Mays kind of, right when he came off the field, I was like, hey, let's talk, work through it, and then he goes and makes those PBUs. So he's already being able to apply that coaching literally in real time, and I think that's another thing that's going to help him see the field certainly.
No, I agree with you. There are a couple of guys I wanted to make sure I shout out here before we move on. I just continue to be impressed with Dylan Robinson, like, day in and day out, just what he does as a fluid mover. And then the other guy is, I want to make sure we talk about Rashawn Clark, where I think we've seen the coaching staff handle him very similarly to how they did in the spring, where he's not starting off as the number one nickel, where it seems like Rashawn Clark has taken a lot of, or excuse me, not Rashawn Clark, Dyson McCutcheon has taken a lot of reps there as well. But like we saw Rashawn do in the spring, he just shows up and makes plays every day. There were a couple times today during the one-on-one period where he got burnt for a touchdown or two, but so did everybody. That's what those drills are designed to do. And he just recovered so well during some of the team periods. And I just couldn't help but think this is why we're so high on that kid, because every single time it's a competitive situation, especially when the full team is out there, he finds different ways to make plays every single time.
And this is why I say test him if you dare. Like, we talked about, I think, recently on the podcast, where when you talked about Jacario, Fisch, and Rashawn Clark, who are you going to test? Rashawn, I think it's going to be pretty quickly shifting to one of the outside corners, and I don't think it's going to be Jacario either, because when you see him make plays time and again and be around the ball, why would you continue to target him and just like, you know, yeah, we know there's a few coaches that think they might be smarter than they really are, but I don't think it's that. That's why I think it's just like he's going to make teams forced to go somewhere else, or he's going to end up getting the ball back.
No, you're right. I just feel like, we're going to get to that Ohio State game. That's going to be such an interesting test because Ohio State loves to use Carnell Tate on the inside. And I'm so curious to see how that's going to work out. That's going to be the true test, in my opinion. One thing I wanted to say, though, before we kind of wrap this up and move on, is this is exactly why you and I are so excited about not just what this season could be, but what Jedd Fisch is building moving forward. You have a couple of, high-end veteran guys, right? You look at both positions and the two senior corners on the outside on defense, and then Denzel, Rashid Williams, Amari Evans, what that could be at wide receiver. But there is so much young depth on this team. And as long as you can continue to figure out what's going on in the trenches, there is so much here for Dezmen to work with at running back. At every position you look around, and there is a young, controllable is the only way to put it, even in this day of NIL, young talent who you can have on your roster for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and just figure out how to build a program around these guys. As you like to say, the foundation has been set, and it's just so intriguing to think about what Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff are doing, which kind of leads into what we really need to get to is there are so many of the things that stood out on Sunday. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. I love using Game Time's zone deals personally, because if you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you. I love using that at baseball games. I use it to watch Paul Skeens of the Pittsburgh Pirates and my Boston Red Sox when they were in town here in Seattle. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Lars, do you want to kick us off? Is there anything that you've got in your notebook that might have just stood out to you today?
Yeah, again, the agenda will continue to be strong. We're going to talk about the future of the program. John Mills. Again, I do not know how many games he will play in, but the man is going to find a way on the field where I saw him get a sprinkle amount of first-team reps just because I think that it's worth starting early on the fall camp. It's not untraditional for coaches to give those guys that spot, but he's really excelled in that. And I think, obviously Paki's got the left guard spot. He's been pretty good there, so I'm not worried about that.
I have some Paki notes I want to get to.
Exactly. So it's not for a lack of Paki being bad. It's for a case of Paki being bad. It's just like they're believing so much in what they're seeing from John Mills in those practice reps and those kind of situational things that when they get him in those 11-on-11 periods, he's holding up against Bryce Butler and guys like that. Now it's not every rep and not perfect, but I think it's just when you talk about the future of the program, like. That's what I'm so curious how many of these freshmen can kind of at least see the field and build their own, as you mentioned, foundation moving into the future.
No, I do like where you're going with that because it just, bleeds over from what I was just saying, where that's one of the positions where I know people still have questions about, the offensive line, the defensive line, and there are certainly still questions that need to be answered. But John Mills, Champ Talialia, you pointed out Jack Schaefer getting some reps at guard today as well. Those guys, the talent, the physicality, everything you need is there. Because it was clear from the second they showed up that, oh yeah, this is what it looks like to have a Big Ten offensive line like that. And that was something we didn't see at any point last year, which leads me into my point because I want to talk about Paki Finau for a second. This is a guy who you and I have been very high on. We've been adamant for a long time now that if you talk to anybody around the program, they are just over the moon excited about what Paki Finau can bring to the table. And there are a couple times during spring practice where I think that we saw why he didn't get more time last season on an offensive line that still struggled. We got to, he looked really good in the Sun Bowl for sure. I know we've talked a lot about that as well, but there were still certainly some, true freshman learning curves that he needed to get over before he could see the field consistently. I have no questions about him anymore. where the one thing in the spring that I know we talked a lot about then as well, as the everydayers know, is he would struggle against power sometimes, especially from, a fifth-year senior like Ontario Thompson, who I have some thoughts about him as well, because we got a chance to get to know him today, which was fantastic. And that was the one thing where I was like, okay, he's still struggling against some of these, pure power kind of guys who can just walk you back into the pocket. That wasn't the case today. There was a rep that he had against Ontario Thompson where he did a really good job. I think that there was a protection breakdown elsewhere. I know I still have it listed as a sack for, I believe it was Zach Durfee, but Paki did such a good job just holding his feet. You can tell that his footwork is better, that his base is stronger, that he's done a really good job in the weight room and just to continue gaining weight and adding strength to his frame. And that's one of the reasons that we're so excited about him, is he just had such a perfect frame to play, I think, tackle in the long run. But right now you can slot a guy in like that at guard and just find so many different ways to, as long as he can hold up strength wise. And after seeing today, I have no questions about that anymore.
I was going to say, yeah, if that was the one question, he's already answered that. I think we knew he was going to, but again, to be objective journalists like we are, we still want to see it in practice at least, so we can come back in a week or two and be, okay, yeah, we want to see him do this. He's already checked that box. I think that's kind of, when you talk about what last season was, that's why, you mentioned Paki getting all those reps was so important, because now going against like a fifth year in Ontario or Uiagalelei, who I want to talk about next, he's already got some experience in live game Big Ten reps where you're not wondering, okay, can he measure up? Can he hold up? Because I think the offensive line, for the most part, I know you said Durfee had a sack, and there were a few protection breakdowns, but DeMont and Kai Horton both had pretty decent pockets for a good majority of practice today. And so, and again, people say, well, hey, what's the context here? I'm not necessarily sure that matters, because we've said also, you're going to be rotating a lot of guys along the defensive line. So the offensive line, no matter who it is, just has to be able to hold up. And I think it's good that they're showing that early on in camp.
No, I agree. And you said you wanted to talk about Uiagalelei. Please feel free.
Yeah, that was one thing that caught my eye, as Aaron Van Horn, the outside linebackers coach, said he's kind of a chess piece. Kind of like you can do so many different things with him. I asked Ty after practice, like, which one do you feel comfortable with? He's like, I'm just a defensive lineman. And I think that was the perfect answer, because when we talk about where Washington needs to improve, it's just straight up along the defensive line, whether it's Ty in the middle, next to, Simone Peppa, Ontario Thompson, pick your choice, because there's so many guys. Or if you want to put him out on the edge a little bit, I don't know necessarily as a stand-up, but he's found a way to make an impact every single which way. And I think we talk about X factors on defense, Sean being one of them. I think Ty along the defensive line is absolutely one, because you don't necessarily know where he's going to line up. And with Brian Walters doing what, trying to find that best one-on-one matchup, he seems like the guy that's poised to benefit, one of the guys that's poised to benefit the most from that.
Yeah, I certainly agree, where I think the Russell Davis injury will maybe move him a little bit more toward the outside. But like everything I saw in spring camp is that and especially like through these first few days of fall as well, he's going to play the majority of his reps on the inside. And then we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. I look at Ty, because I remember when you asked that question, it harkened me back to when we got to talk to him in the spring as well. He gave a very similar answer. He was just like, I just love playing defensive line, man. Like, you throw me out there anywhere, I'm going to find a way to just, try to find success, because I just enjoy playing this position, which is always just really fun to hear. And there are two other guys that I wanted to talk about at that position. I want to start with Ontario Thompson, where he was a really interesting get. Remember, he was the first defensive lineman that Washington added through just the transfer portal window back in December. And there were people that were, I don't want to say they were confused, but it was just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, this is a guy who was at Iowa a couple of years ago and was at Western Michigan. I was really impressed with some of the things that he said today, where we've known he's a great athlete for a long time. That was like the first thing that popped out back when you go back and watch his Iowa film. That's why they like playing him on special teams. He's a big, powerful guy who has done a really good job collapsing the pocket at times. And I can't remember if it was you or somebody else who asked him, it's just, what were you trying to work on, when you got here? What has been the biggest point of emphasis for you? And he said, I needed to stop thinking so much. I just needed to play fast and free. And I think that this coaching staff has done a really good job helping find ways to open him up and just get the most out of himself, because that was the thing that stood out to me. Is it just seemed like, just not from some of the questions that various members of the media were asking, but just from his answers as well, is he knows what kind of potential he has, but he had never fully been able to unlock it. And this coaching staff, whether it be Ryan Walters, Jason Kafusi, Aaron Van Horn, whoever it may be, has done a really good job of helping him just say, stop thinking so much, go out there, play fast, play free. And I think this defensive scheme with Ryan Walters, giving him more opportunities in one-on-one situations, will help him with that as well.
And I think it doesn't hurt that he's a fifth year. So it's like, hey, this is your last shot to do it, my guy. Like, you wanted to talk about putting it all together. You want to talk about slowing it down because you're all right about that. But then that's why it's so imperative that we see it now. We saw it in the spring and we're seeing it again in the fall. So I think he already realized that the opportunity he has, and it could be a match made in heaven because, when you look at what Washington needed, they needed some guys, the veteran guys, those senior guys, not necessarily 1 year rentals per se, but guys who can step in, make that impact, and pave the way for the Omar Khans and younger guys to impact down the line.
No, absolutely. And in that light, one other guy I wanted to talk about before we get out of here is Bryce Butler. There was one play today where I've been talking about Bryce Butler for a while now as someone who can just find ways to be disruptive and get into the backfield with a really nice first step where he shoots gaps and just breaks plays down. He did that today against Julian McMahon, and I was just so impressed, man. His first step off the line of scrimmage is so quick. I don't remember who was lined up in front of him because it didn't matter. He just, before you could do anything, he got skinny, got between the guard and the center, and was in the backfield and wrapped up Julian McMahon just in a heartbeat. And that is such an exciting part of this defensive line to me, is each guy, like, I think he's by far the best of the team when it comes to that first step, but each guy brings just a slightly different skill set to the table. And when you talk about the rotations that we're going to see from the defensive line, that is such a big part of it to me, is when you can combine a guy like that with, maybe a space eater and Simone Peppa, who's going to take on some more double teams and give him some different opportunities to win one-on-one. I love what Bryce and Alinius Davis and some of these other defensive tackles bring to the table. And I don't think this is going to be an elite group per se in the Big Ten, but it's like we keep talking about. If you can just take a step from 15th in the Big Ten in sacks and rushing yards allowed from last season to, let's just call it 8 or 9 this year, is that not at least 1 or 2 extra wins right there, just in terms of time of possession, a turnover or 2 maybe was in there, just some different things that we didn't see last year?
Absolutely. I mean, controlling the run as well, I would add in that, kind of no matter what metric you want to talk about, I think just chipping away at it, because UW is in a lot of those games if you have some, possessions go more UW way. If the offense is able to get back on the field, then you talk about the dynamic ability of DeMond Williams, how we started the show. You give that guy the ball another time or two, and you're talking about 7 or 14 points, not 3 potentially. Like, that's a significant difference in the grand scheme of things.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the Fadeers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout fall camp. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. That's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you never miss when we post a new show. Any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.